Thank you, Wade, for having me. I've been a YPO member for 7 years, and I've been in the cryptocurrency field for the last 5 years. I first learned about Bitcoin and other cryptos in the middle of the desert at a festival called Burning Man that's held by a lot of anarchists, and we were under a tent under 40 degrees, and I saw this group of individuals chatting about the lack of trust that they have towards governments and other, Big Brother type of entities. And I was actually intrigued by it. I had heard of it before, but was intrigued, and I realized that there was, the idea of bootstrapping worldwide currency was either going to function in some crazy way, or it was just going to collapse and being one of those other startup type failures. So I started digging into the space, and in 2014, in several of my businesses, I started accepting Bitcoin as a mode of payment. Didn't truly understand what it was all about, but thought that maybe this could be worth something one day. And then I started looking at the different ways of benefiting from this industry. And I realized that mining, that the heart of the ecosystem, that validating transactions was actually the less speculative way of generating revenue, and decided to scale that business. We started first in Las Vegas and afterwards in Washington State, and now we have a factory in Texas, a mining center in Texas. We have about $100 million worth of equipment within that facility, and opening another facility a few kilometers from it. Just at a show of hands, how many people own Bitcoin? So about 10 people. How many people own Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies? So about half of that, 5 people. Does anybody does mining within the audience? 1 person. Two. So there's basically 3 ways to acquire cryptocurrencies. The first way is to change your fiat currencies into crypto using exchanges. The second way is to sell product and services and accepting cryptos as a mode of payment. And the third way is to mine it. I was the first one that was the most skeptical about this industry. I had a very kind of traditional business background. I did my MBA at Columbia Business School in New York. Most of the guys in the school were either in banks, either in hedge funds, either in consulting. We benefited from the statu quo. But we realized that after the financial crisis in 2008, things have changed. And when Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonym who invented Bitcoin, so it could be one person, it could be several people, it could be a woman or a group of women, we don't know who it is. But what we realized is that there was a significant lack of trust that was happening in the system. And ultimately, the 3 things that created the trust element within cryptocurrencies was, first of all, encryption. The second part was the decentralized aspect and the belief in mathematics, and the third part was the cryptography element. So as we start in that thought process of why I thought Bitcoin was something interesting back then and never so by now, I wanted to share with you some vision and testimonies about what other people think about it.
Okay? We are entering a completely world of uncharted water.
Have you made any investments in Bitcoin?
So I own Bitcoin in my hedge fund, I own Bitcoin in my fund, I own Bitcoin in my private account. It is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Because what we're talking about right now is for the next 3 to 5 years, an unbelievably better store value. It is gold 2.0.
I think this is a currency that's really going to work eventually.
Well, I think it
cryptocurrencies like it that may be even better. But in the meantime, there's a big industry around Bitcoin, and people have made fortunes out of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, there is no Bitcoin company, there is no Bitcoin building, there's not even a Bitcoin server anywhere that you could shut down. It is completely distributed. That's what's unique about Bitcoin. It is, for the first time, a way for the two of us to exchange value online without a third-party intermediary. Until the invention of Bitcoin, for you and me to exchange money online, we had to employ a third party, like PayPal, like Visa, like MasterCard, right? And we live in the 21st century. If we want to have a video call to China, we can do that for free. But to send a couple $100, which is essentially just ones and zeros being moved around, costs 5% plus takes over a day.
Bitcoin is exciting because it shows how cheap it can be. Bitcoin is better than currency in that you don't have to be physically in the same place. And of course, for large transactions, currency can get pretty inconvenient.
You'll see Bitcoin trading at 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000. Rick Fogvenia does an excellent analysis. He predicts that Bitcoin will capture between 1 and 10% of the global forex market, which implies a price of between $100,000 to $1 million per Bitcoin. Most of the people who are on the sidelines not buying Bitcoin today will start to buy Bitcoin when it gets over 1,000. And then a greater percentage of people will definitely plow into Bitcoin when it starts to get over 10,000.
I'm still predicting Bitcoin, $10,000 per Bitcoin in 3 years.
Soros, he's the CEO of Zappo, which is a Bitcoin wallet and Bitcoin vault.
I think it's mostly a very positive thing. I think we're going to see ups and downs like with any other emerging technology. But I think Bitcoin is here to stay, and it makes sense that it be taxed and treated like any other.
So let's make a call here. In 10 years, what do you think Bitcoin will be worth? One Bitcoin.
Between $500,000 and $1 million.
A lot of people are just seeing the charts and thinking how high it'll go. But what I'm doing is counting backwards. I mean, this is a transactional currency, and it is a store of value. As such, it is a product and a service competing on a very tangible market for stores of value and for transactional currencies. So what is the size of that market?
Right. And this is important.
And how big a market share can Bitcoin realistically take within a foreseeable time frame? When you ask that question, then you come up with a market cap of Bitcoin total, and then you divide that by the number of Bitcoin in circulation by your estimated time, and seeing how Chinese are buying Bitcoin like crazy. I've actually had to adjust this number upwards, but then you come up with a number of about $2 to $5 million per Bitcoin.
So there's two elements that are interesting about the Bitcoin world. The first one is the technology element within the currency itself. The second part is things that are not in the control of the Bitcoin ecosystem. The first part we're going to see is a video that's going to explain
so what is
the value of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is a revolutionary technology that enables a new way to send payments over the internet. You can think of it as an open accounting system where thousands of computers all over the world work together to track ownership of digital tokens called Bitcoins. When you send someone Bitcoins, the transaction is broadcast to the entire network. After it's verified, it's recorded in a public ledger called the blockchain. The blockchain contains a record of every Bitcoin transaction that has occurred since the system began, and it's shared and maintained on the network, so everyone keeps the books, so to speak. Most currencies are issued by a central authority that controls the money supply. Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer system, so there is no central authority. Instead, Bitcoins are issued to users who help process transactions in the network. This is known as Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin miners are specialized computers that do the work required to verify and record transactions in the blockchain. As a reward for their work, the miners earn Bitcoins, and this is how new Bitcoins are released into circulation. The system is programmed so that only 21 million Bitcoins will ever exist, and as time goes by, the mining reward decreases. The result is a predictable supply that's governed by scarcity, making Bitcoin somewhat like a digital gold. It's the first currency of the internet, and everyone is free to use it. With Bitcoin, you can send any amount of money to anyone, anywhere in the world, as easily as sending an email.
So who knows when this cover of The Economist came out? This came out in 1988. That was the first idea of a world currency. This currency is called the Phoenix, and it came obviously a year after the financial crisis of '87. Why did we have a financial crisis, and why is it important to look at the history of money? We had a financial crisis because countries were competing against each other. There was that spiral downwards of exchange rate pressures about putting barriers between each other that led to higher interest rate, that led to a stock crash. This sounds very familiar with what could happen at the moment. So within this article, it basically says that American, Europeans, and Japanese are better off to have one world currencies that is going to be easier for individuals to trade between them rather than being hostages within their own system. Professor Abdallah, I've been doing the Harvard Business School program at YPO for the last 6 years, and one of our professors said a very interesting sentence. He says, for some people, their economy is a gateway, for others, it's a prison. It really depends where you stand. And even in the US itself, if you live on the border in New York and California, you benefit from the internationalization. If you live in the middle of a country, you're having more issues which influences your political views. So that happened in 1988. And at the end of the article, the last sentence was, pencil in the Phoenix in the next 30 years, and when it comes, welcome it. And that's why at the bottom of the Phoenix, it says 2018. And in terms of the issues that we're having at the moment, and these issues are the reasons why Bitcoin went from an idea to a $200 billion market cap. If you are 50 years old right now living in the United States, the value of your US dollar, the only reserve currency in the world, has gone down by 75%. If you look at it over 100 years, it has lost 99% of its value. So you're losing 75% and 99% of its value within your lifetime. Why is that? Why is there inflation built in the currency itself? Well, we're having a major problem that's going to lead, in my opinion, to the next crisis, is that we are printing money over money. That trust element, the fact that we have $25 trillion of debt that are never going to be able to reimburse, the fact that there's a negative interest rate in 29 of the central banks, the fact that there's a minimum of 2% inflation is not a system that is going to continue indefinitely. There's 193 currencies in the world, the bottom 30 collapse. And I know this well because my mother is Venezuelan. Last year was an inflation rate of 4,000%. This year we expect over 10,000%. So when you explain Bitcoin to a Venezuelan, they understand it in very rapidly because this is going to be the difference between having dinner at night or not having dinner. The same way that you will explain it to anybody that is born when the internet was around. They understand two things. The first one is that we see the internet as a country. There's the offline world, and we used to dip sometimes in the online world. Now it's different. People live in the online world, and sometimes they come back at reality. And the second part is that you need to have a currency that's made for the 21st century, that's borderless, that's frictionless, that is able to live the lifestyle that people are living within their online world. So when we compare the Bitcoin to gold and to dollars, we see Bitcoin as gold 2.0. We see it actually as a better gold. Now we're going to say, generally the first question that comes out is to say, well, what is the intrinsic value of Bitcoin? When you look at the world, the top 5 biggest companies in the world now are all digital companies. Amazon, Google, Facebook, 10 years ago during the Facebook IPO, I still remember people saying, well, there's no value in a company like Facebook. Actually, it's not even that there's no value, there should be a negative value because they're losing money. All of a sudden, this company is taking over the world, influencing elections. Same thing with Google, same thing with Amazon. We're at a point where the only stock ideas that most of people have is to say, hey, how much money do I need to put on Amazon? And that is after the institutions, after the everybody has put funds after funds behind it. When you look at the intrinsic value, most of the items in the world, the intrinsic value is based on a game of trust, as we say, or a game of perceptions. What is the intrinsic value of a Picasso painting? So it sells for $100 million at Christie's, the intrinsic value might be $40. Even when you look at gold itself, the intrinsic value might be actually 10% of the amount of the actual cost of the gold itself. The other is basically what's in what the market established as the price. And in terms of the US dollar, $100 bills, intrinsic value is 20 cents. Now some might say, well, it's the power of the US Army. That's really the intrinsic value. The fact that if you go out of the US dollars and threaten to go to the euro, like Iraq or Syria did, is going to be a major issue. And that is the cause of the reason why the flow of payment needs to continue. And that's the biggest threat that government have at the moment. So in terms of Bitcoin itself, there's also a shift of generations. When it was my grandparents' generations, they wanted to have gold that they could put in their mattress. Now we're in a world where the material aspect for millennials doesn't really matter. They don't really care about owning a car as long as they have Uber. Actually, there was that quote saying, Instagram killed the car. Millennials prefer being in the car, in the passenger seat, being on Instagram, and it's considered a burden to actually drive the car itself. So one of the major pushback has been from the banking sector. And that's what I call the 5 stages of grief. And it happened during the internet years, and it happened in probably even in industry. And all the phenomena that we see with cryptocurrency are actually phenomena that has happened in other categories. So when we study history, we basically realize that things will happen over and over again. So the first stage was the denial, was to say, well, it's never going to work. And that worked up until it reached $1 billion market cap. Over $1 billion, and they says, well, it's actually working, so we're going to the second stage. The second stage is the anger, is to say, well, if it doesn't collapse by itself, we're going to lobby government to make it collapse because we feel it's going to be a threat, we think it's going to take over our business, and we're upset. So we're going to say it's for money launderers, we're going to say it's for drug traffickers, and we're going to basically put pressure on the currency itself. The third step after that was the bargaining phase. It says, well, government basically says it's fine, they should compete with the rest of, with you guys, the banks. So the third step is the bargaining phase, is to say, well, Bitcoin, we don't like, but we love blockchain. That would be the equivalent of saying, imagine you are a horse carriage owner 100 years ago, and the first automobile come in the scene, and you're going to feel threatened by the first automobile. And you're going to say, well, the real value of the automobile, it's not really the combustion engine, it's the tires. So we're going to take over the tires, we're going to put it in the horse carriage, and this is the part that we're going to like. The rest of the automobile really doesn't matter. And for the interesting part about the blockchain technology, which is not new, by the way, the new element is the decentralization aspect, is that nobody controls it, is that it's 100% trustable. The fourth phase after that is going to be the depression phase, when the remittance business is going to be disrupted, when the banking business is going to be disrupted, and where nobody can do anything about it. Why? Because the only way to shut it down would be to shut down the internet. Now, I have the view that it's impossible to shut down the internet. Some of my business partners says, don't ever use the word impossible. But I believe that if every government would sit around the table and make a decision, I do not believe that they will all agree to shut down the internet just because Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency is around. If they had the power, they probably would start with climate change and then going to down the ladder and taking other types of decision. And then the fifth stage is going to be the acceptance stage. It's going to say, well, you know what? At the end of the day, we always believed in it. We thought from the beginning it was going to be great. The same way that happened with the internet, and we're just gonna embrace it. Some banks like Goldman Sachs say, hey, we're gonna start a cryptocurrency desk. Same thing with Soros hedge fund that says, we're gonna start a desk as well and start really looking into it. Why? Purely from a business standpoint. They realize that Coinbase is going to do over the last 12 months $1 billion of net income, and they have between 2 and 3% of the overall Bitcoin transaction business, and that's more than the trading floor of Goldman Sachs itself. So they see a business opportunity behind that. And then the last part of it is in terms of investments. When I was talking about Bitcoin last year, when it was a bit under $1,000, people were telling me, well, it's way too expensive, we missed the boat, it's not worth it anymore. And when you look at the overall market cap, you're at a market cap of $200 billion. And you're on a market value of $200 billion because we're still at the friends and family round at this point. This is all retail type of investors. This is all people that put a few $100s in the currency itself. The institutions, the big boys, are not yet in the game. And we see another 10x potential behind the currency. We believe that $2 trillion is really the market cap where it should be at, about 25% of the overall gold market. Of Bitcoin, personally, I'm not selling my Bitcoin up until it reaches $25,000. I see that as significantly undervalued until we reach that amount. And with that, I would like to open it with questions.